Hi, my name is Cindy Dinh, and I'm a senior corporate counsel at SCOA, working in the legal department in Houston.
So, where did you grow up, Cindy?
Here, born and raised in Houston. My parents came to the U.S. as refugees after the Vietnam War. They made themselves home here, and other than grad school, I've been in Houston since then.
Okay. Where did you go to college?
Rice University. It's one of those private schools nestled in the middle of the city. So when you leave the hedges, you can see the Texas Medical Center and take the metro down to downtown. But luckily, I had a car, so I was able to see other parts of the town, including taking friends for dinner in Asia Town, which is one of the largest areas of Houston.
They have an interesting sort of residential system.
I like to analogize it to Harry Potter. Freshman students get sorted into a college that has their very own traditions, and there's some fun intramural competition between the residential colleges. But that's where you have your dorm, that's where you have your cafeteria, and a lot of students identify with that particular residential college. So if I meet another Rice student or Rice alum, usually the first question they'll ask is, what college were you from? So for me, that would be McMurtry College. I was part of the first graduating class of that dormitory that opened up probably in the early 2010s. I graduated in 2011 and was able to implement some traditions that hopefully carry on to the next year's class.
Wow, that was interesting. I have never heard of something like that in any other college. That's very unique. And then you said you went to law school in Houston also?
I went away. So after,
Oh,
living in Houston for a while, I wanted to see what other coasts had to offer. So I ended up applying to a joint degree, meaning law school at the University of California, Berkeley, and then a master's in public administration at Harvard Kennedy School. And it was a 4-year program where I ended up going to the Kennedy School for 1 year, and then 2 years of law school. And then my final year, I spent 1 semester at each program. So I was crisscrossing, experiencing different weather patterns, discovered I don't like the cold, but I do like the snow. So when it came down to graduating and discovering where my first job would be, I applied widely, but also applied to Houston positions, and luckily was able to work with a federal district judge based in Houston, going back to my home roots.
great. Okay. You were the first lawyer in your family. You had actually mentioned that. And today you advise one of the world's largest trading companies. That kind of journey had to start at a moment when you were interested in pursuing law. What was it, if you can recall, what was it about law that sort of drew you to it?
Sure, it's really being an advocate, right? Growing up, I watched my mom be an advocate for our family, whether it be complimenting or complaining about a customer service incident, right? I saw that she was putting her best foot forward without a law degree. And I worked in college to volunteer with nonprofits to connect people and lead them to trips to Washington, D.C., where they could meet with their members of Congress. And through that, they were able to convey their concerns and ask for sponsorships for certain bills. At that time, the Vietnamese community was interested in human rights issues in Southeast Asia. So that was something I helped them facilitate for them. And I realized it was a great way to change a law, but you also don't have to be a lawyer to change a law. So hence I discovered the master's in public administration side of things. My original career trajectory was going to be working at Capitol Hill, maybe for a member of Congress. And that's still a fun interest side hobby of mine, but I discovered that once you go to law school, it does help to have a career in law right afterwards. A lot of law firms, a lot of judges hire directly out of law school. So that was the path I took first. And I've been on it for the past 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, were there some areas in law school that you had become more interested in, and then that kind of helped your trajectory where you were going? And were there certain lessons that you learned that helped you become the leader that you are?
Sure. I was able to work on some policy changes at the state level when I was a law student. And I realized that all the skills I learned at the Kennedy School was all the soft skills really helped because in law school you don't learn much about working with others and negotiations, that sense. You do learn the hard text, right, of how to interpret a case, how do you write like a lawyer. So when you combine those two patterns, I was able to work with the California legislator to introduce an idea for a new bill that will allow college students to automatically register to vote when they register for classes. So that was something that the legislature took under advisement. Another student, classmate, and I ended up testifying in the California State Legislature, and the bill passed. So we were super excited about that, to see that in action. And when I later looked and reflected on that, I realized a lot of it's advocacy based. So litigation was kind of the path I wanted to take afterwards. That's what you typically see on TV, the lawyers who go to court. They also have to read and write a lot and persuade other people, including the judge. So my first career position was working for a federal district judge as a clerkship. So I was the ghost writer for the judge. I was researching and writing the opinions that the judge would later issue. And that allowed me to actually read really good briefs and also pretty bad briefs. So you see a range of spectrum from the lawyers out there. And I ended up working for two different law firms after that in the commercial litigation space.
Okay. And what was the period of time between that and being at Sumitomo?
I did about a year working with the judge, and then 6 years after that, working in the two different law firms. And when I pivoted to working in house at Sumitomo, it was also an opportunity for me to take on new skills. At Sumitomo, we don't just work on disputes, we also handle commercial contract negotiations, mergers and acquisitions of new entities and investments, and general advice to our business groups. So I broadened my toolkit just by that one transition. And I'm learning a lot from the business groups that I support, particularly in the energy space.
Okay. Okay. Now, when you're working in business law, um, uh, one of the challenges that I have heard, and you can tell me if this is true, is trying to balance the risk while continuing to focus on good business, which risk management is all about trying to do what is best for the company, but it doesn't give you a lot of leeway. So how are you able to balance that with people viewing you in the company as being pro-business? Because that can
Right.
be that can be a tough balance, I bet.
Yeah, I think legal also has that reputation for being the Department of No. And I want to stray away from that by first, my advice is only as good as the business unit if they can understand it, right? I can always tell them, here are the risk things throughout the identification issues, but if they don't understand exactly what that means and the implications for their business, then it doesn't do them any good. So I have to step back and be a teacher of sorts and guide them and coach them through this process. So a lot of times we can leverage things too. So if there's a high risk area in the contract, we say if they agree to this, then we can agree to something else that they want, right? And that's a discussion I have to have with each business group. And also, I have to have a familiarity with what they are trying to do. What are they selling? What are the products? Where are the areas and the pain points for them? So, if I see something that's risky in the legal sense, it may not actually be something that happens often in the commercial sense. So, they can say, this is a bigger customer that we've had years of dealings with. We're not concerned that they're not going to pay us back. So I can then take some more accommodations to the legal terms, knowing that background. But it's often a conversation that has to happen. I can't just send somebody an email and hopefully hope that all of my concerns are conveyed. I often like to work with them in person to work with these issues.
And I imagine part of that conversation is understanding that risk management can involve asking permission, and when on the other end of it, it's asking for forgiveness.
That's
Um,
right. And at
find
the
that
end
the-
of the day, they can always use legal as an excuse to say, legal told me no, so sorry.
oh, okay,
We can
all
always be
right.
the scapegoat for that. That's fine.
And have you come across moments when you have given your consultation on this and then they just don't listen to you? And then it, it becomes something then you have to deal with later because they didn't really listen to what you were saying.
Knock on wood, most of our advice does get conveyed. It may not be the perfect outcome that from a legal risk analysis we would like, but it's the best we could do in that situation. And then oftentimes a contract's written 5 years ago, and then a dispute happens later on. That's when we can always deal with it then.
Okay, okay. Now, as we see on LinkedIn and in other places, you work a lot in community service. It's something that's very important to you. So how has that sort of volunteer work influenced the way that you lead and the way that you advise others?
Since joining Sumitomo, I feel like I've become an authentic leader, right? I'm able to convey both sides of my personal and professional lifestyle by talking about the volunteer opportunities and things I care about. And that's because Sumitomo actually appreciates and embraces that. Never before have I been at a company where they give you 3 paid time off days to volunteer or match your donations through the Affinity program. So I've been able to make a bigger impact that way. And if I'm not in the trenches doing the good work out there, I'm at least able to donate and support that financially. Some of the causes that I care about have been things I've been doing growing up in Houston, including advising and coaching young people. So I volunteer with the Houston Bar Association. It's a group of lawyers here in Houston. I've been around since the 1800s. And one of the committees I've joined was to get into the schools, to read books about the Constitution to elementary school kids, or to walk them through the history of Texas and the legal system, and also to allow them to see and talk to a real life attorney. It's not the people on the billboards or on TV all the time. I'm soft spoken, for example, but I also am very persuasive in other ways. So it's a balance, and I do appreciate the opportunity to do that throughout the year.
Okay. You recently spoke about the importance of leaders who can bridge the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Why do you think the broader perspective has become so important? And what advice would you give to young professionals who want to, embrace that end of things and make an impact?
That's a great question because oftentimes when we think about the world's biggest problems, we think about government being the solution, but sometimes it's actually all three, right? I've been able to work in both the government and the private sector and volunteer in the nonprofit sectors. And there are synergies that are sometimes untapped. So if someone's trying to solve an issue, working amongst all three of them would be a great way to figure out what resources each sector has and hopefully bridge that gap. I've been lucky to volunteer with the City of Houston's Asian American Advisory Board as a board member. And although I'm one of the youngest people on the board, I feel like I'm able to contribute something by sharing my perspective there. And it's not just endemic to Houston. I think every major city and county has these boards and advisory boards. And it's incumbent on us to figure out how to apply to these things. Ranges anywhere from if you have interest in entertainment and sports, there's a board for you. The airports, or tax incentive boards too. So I think that's a great way to share your skill set with the community. But particularly for young people, it's really about bringing others with them. I'm lucky to have gone to really great institutions or school, and education was really the leveling part for me. My father was a car mechanic for the past 20 years, and before he retired, and my mom was a homemaker and interpreter. So for us, our family, they were just following my career trajectory with awe because this is the first time they've ventured into these spaces of law and public policy, and now in the corporate sense where I'm working. So it's been good for me to also give back. And whenever I see students who are curious about my career, I'm always happy to take a phone call or a video chat with them and really share those experiences. Hopefully these are just data points that helps them make their own decisions, but it's also a nice way for all of us to encourage the next generation.
Just to wrap up, do you have any particular outreach or nonprofit areas that you are working with that you'd like to tell us about?
Sure. Some of the issues I care about kind of span over the years. I've always been in with advocacy, especially with Asian American Pacific Islanders. And that's because it's an overseen group, right? There's a group called OCA National where I was an intern back in college days that I still volunteer with now. And I mentor current college students through that program. But it's a way to kind of showcase both the social and civic engagement aspects and encourage people to enter the halls of power, right? Congress and other places are not just spaces for people who have a certain degree, who look a certain way, or from a certain zip code. So it's encouraging people to be advocates for their communities and to show them that this is another pathway forward to make change.
Wonderful. That's great advice. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us today for SUMICAST. This has been a pleasure to talk to you about your career and about all the great outreach and all the great things that you're working on to help enrich lives and the world, as we like to say. So thank you again, Cindy, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stephen.